On November 5th, by securing both the majority at the both the majority of the Electoral College and the popular vote, Donald Trump made a remarkable return to the White House. In January, he will be sworn in as the 47th President of the United States, once again pledging to uphold the Constitution. For his second term, President Trump will govern with a majority in the Senate, you will remember, previously held by a slim majority of Democrats, and is expected to secure a majority in the House. As for the Supreme Court, with 3 justices appointed by Donald Trump during his previous term, along with major rulings like the reversal of Roe v. Wade, the court is definitely aligned with Republican.
I apologize for everyone. I think we are experiencing some technical issues from Mathilde's side. Just bear with us for a minute. Hopefully she will be back in a second.
Vous m'avez retrouvé là? I'm back.
Yes, we can hear you now, Mathilde.
I'm so sorry for this issue. So I was at how much of the result was down to racism and misogyny. Based on the overall outcomes, how can we explain the specific results regarding women's rights? What can we expect from President Trump's upcoming term? He has already started forming his future cabinet. Before the webinar was launched, we were discussing with Karen and Vicky about Elon Musk's appointment to the Department of Government Efficiency. So who will be part of this cabinet? And what checks and balances will remain in place given that the major institutions largely align with President Trump's agenda? What policy will he pursue? Will he implement Project 25 from the Heritage Foundation? Karen Tramontano, my dear friend and business partner in the US, co-founder and CEO of Blue Star Strategy, former Deputy Chief of Staff of President Clinton, will address this point for us. With respect to Europe, Donald Trump's re-election has triggered a new existential crisis. The question remains, are we, as Europeans, truly united and ready to defend European interests? Trump returns to the White House is definitely a challenge for us. The EU, which claims to be ready to assert its power, is nonetheless facing a major difficulty. European unity in the face of Trump is far from guaranteed. The issue, as Vicky will explain you, the issue was at the heart of the discussion during the European Political Community Summit hosted by Viktor Orban, who is a close supporter to President Trump and a current holder of the EU presidency on November 7. President Macron, the French president, summed up the situation by stating, and I will read it because it's in English, "For me, it's simple. The world is made up of herbivores and carnivores. If we decide to remain herbivores, the carnivores will win and we will become a market for them." Meanwhile, the Franco-German so-called partnership is struggling. President Macron is attempting to assert his leadership at the European level, but is confronted with a very difficult domestic situation. Chancellor Scholz, as you know, dismissed his finance minister and plans to hold a vote on confidence in December and snap legislative election in February. In contrast, Hungary, followed by Italy, is taking a leadership role. Although the position often clashes with other EU members, Poland too is asserting itself, calling for a strategic awakening of the EU and pushing for stronger leadership. These countries, while at odds with each other, are increasingly driving the political agenda within the Union. While the EU had anticipated Trump's victory, it's currently preparing for an economic impact, particularly with the threat of higher tariffs. The true test will be how they collectively respond to a potential trade war. Viktoria Vajnai, my friend and managing partner at Publion EU, as well as a board member of the Transatlantic Alumni Network, renowned for her expertise in European policy and geopolitical relations, will help us untangle the situation. After setting the scenes on both sides of the Atlantic, Karen and Vicky will focus on key issues: trade, sustainability, and defense. So let's start with you, Karen. Um, First question: how did President Trump win?
Well, thank you, Mathilde, Vicky. It's a pleasure to join you and Publicon and my partners at Blue Star Strategies in Paris. It's a good question, and I think let me just make a couple of points. First of all, in comparison to 2020, where Biden received 81 million votes, President Trump received about 74 plus million. Vice President Harris, about 72 million. If you were to listen to the press, it sounds like that differential in 10 million votes between what Vice President Harris got and what President Biden got, that differential of about 10 million votes, you would think that all those votes went to President Trump and he won by a landslide, and the whole dynamic of the United States body politic has changed. That didn't happen. About 10 million people did not vote.
Sorry to interrupt, Karen. I know you have some chart. Maybe we will put the chart on.
Yes, if you could put the chart on now. I just wanted to sort of set the stage on the overall vote. So just so the audience knows, President Trump increased his vote between 2020 and 2024 by 700,000 votes. So not 7 million, not 10 million, 700,000 votes. Now, all the votes are not counted, and those numbers, will go up, as will Harris's numbers. But I think in the end, the difference in the popular vote will be about 1.5%. So I know people are concerned about this election, but it was far, far from a red wave. Now, just a few more numbers to outline how he won. What Trump told us for 2 years was that, and throughout this election, that he was going to engage low information voters, low engagement voters, and that's how he was going to win. And that's exactly what he did, and that's how he won. And you can see it in the mail vote. Trump got 55% of the mail vote. Harris got 42% of the mail vote. It was a 5-point swing. And what I mean by that is Trump increased his mail vote by 2 percentage points, but Harris decreased from Biden 3 percentage points. So that was a 5-point swing. Similarly, and maybe even more concerning, there was a shift among women. Harris got 53% of the women vote. That's great. She won. Trump got 45% of the women vote. But there was a 7-point shift from 2020. Trump increased by 3 points. Harris decreased by 4 points over the numbers that Biden got. That 7-point shift was, and in addition to that 5-point shift, was the race. In the white vote makes up 71% of the electorate, and Trump won that vote by 60%. Harris was 37%. Democrats always lose the white vote. Harris actually did a little bit better than Biden did. So that shift was not as determinative. But the significant shifts were in the African-American vote. African-American vote makes up 11% of the vote. African-American men make up 7% of the vote. The shift was from 19%, he grew it to 21%. But the biggest shift was in the Latino vote. Latino vote makes up 12% of the electorate. Fully a 19% shift for Trump in the male Latin vote and an 8% shift in the women Latina vote. So it's a significant shift there. There was also a big shift in terms of young people. Now, Harris won the vote. She won it by 55%, but she was 5 points lower than Biden's numbers, and Trump increased his margin in the youth vote. Vote is calculated between ages 18 and 29. He increased by 6%. So how he won were those shifts. And he shifted only 700,000 votes. That's what he shifted, but that's how he won.
Thank you so much, Karen, for setting the scene, and those numbers are very interesting. So my second question is, why did he win? And I have concerns over inflation and immigration, overridden all other issues in the mind of American voters. And more importantly, how much of the results was down to racism and misogyny, according to you?
Okay. Well, listen, presidential elections, I think, in all countries are about the economy, the popularity of the individual who's running, and also about what is in the news cycle, okay? And so just in terms of the popularity, so in this case, the incumbent, Biden, his popularity sank when he withdrew from Afghanistan. His popularity never rose after that. His popularity was the albatross around Vice President Harris's neck, and she could not, having served in the administration, she could not take that cloak off of her neck successfully. The numbers also tell us a little bit more about why he won. Trump, in working class income group, lower than $50,000 a year annual income. In middle class income groups from 50 to 100,000, he won both of those categories significantly. The only income category that Harris won was people earning over 100,000. If you contrast that to when President Biden won those lower income, middle income categories by almost 60% in each. I mean, he bested Trump in those. That's where the votes are. So that's the how he won. But it also explains why he won, because prices were on the ballot. Prices have been high in the United States. They've been high everywhere since the post-pandemic economies. Prices have been in inflation, of course, prices to be through the roof. So has price gouging, by the way. Of course, prices to go through the roof. And frankly, the Biden administration did nothing about it. The Fed thought it was transitory, and they kept telling people it was transitory. They let it go for fully a year. Biden didn't put any barriers on corporate price gouging. And it was an issue that was in the news, again, driving that news cycle. And people were hurt by the economy. you had 68% of the population saying that they were either undergoing a severe hardship because of inflation and price increases, or a more moderate hardship. But when you have 68% of the population telling you for 2 years that they're hurting, that is going to take a toll. And that was, in fact, the driver. That's what animated the race, was the economy. And Harris could never separate herself enough. And yes, she had a policy agenda, but she could never separate herself from the inaction. The other issue, Mathilde, was immigration that animated the race constantly, but it also had been in the news for over 2 years. And millions of immigrants came to the United States without proper documentation. And the Biden administration took no action until the 3 months before the election. And that could not be overcome. I mean, Harris was asked, okay, yes, Trump killed this legislation, but why didn't you do more? Now,
and Karen, I'm sorry, because I'm the maître des horloges, as President Macron loved to say. So, in your opinion, based on the overall results, how can we explain the specific results regarding women's rights? Because I know they were on the ballot, and sorry, I'm interrupting you. If you want to finish on peace and democracy quickly.
Yes. No, so just really quickly, again, the voters want peace and prosperity. And the war in Gaza, the war in Ukraine animated the media for 2 years. So it was front of mind. And let me just say one other thing to answer your question directly. Was there racism and misogyny in this race? Absolutely. It came out of Trump's mouth every single day of the campaign. It was just not, if you look at the numbers, the only sort of significant shift that might lead one to, especially having a misogyny be a driver, is probably the Latino vote, which is a full shift of 19%. But you really didn't see those kinds of shift in the white male vote. They stayed pretty much where they were for 2020. Let me just jump to answer your question, Mathilde. I think women woke up and said on that election day morning and said, there's too much noise about all of this going on. I'm not going to rely on the president of the United States or the Congress to take care of me. And you saw it in the initiatives. There were 10 ballot initiatives. And even in so-called red states, those initiatives won by 60%, 58%, 62%, 67%. And so there was a lot of crossover. There was crossover of Republican women. There were crossover of independent women. In all of those states that had the initiatives on them, all of those initiatives, the percentage was far higher than what Harris got in a Democratic state or what Trump got in a Republican state. So contrary to the media, abortion is still a key issue. I think women have just said, I'm taking care of myself. I'm going to change the law in my state, and then I'm going to be okay. And I think that's why you see that shift.
Thank you so much, Karen. And I think we were all very eager to know that. So I have a last question for you. So what and I know we will go in more details about that also in the dialogue with Vicky in the third part, but I have a devil question. What can we expect from President Trump upcoming term? He has already started forming his future cabinet. Who will be part of it? And what checks and balances will remain in place given that major institutions are now largely aligned with his agenda, not to speak about social media with his dearest Elon and X.
Yeah. Okay, so let me.
Can you share quickly your thoughts on that?
Let me try to address those. So I think what you're going to see are tax cuts. You're going to see reductions in spending for energy and climate change. You're going to see more oil and gas. You're going to see the reduction or elimination in Ukraine spending. And, you know, so I think those are the ones that are going to happen out of the box. The other ones, like tariffs, which I think we're going to talk a little bit more about, are a little bit harder to do. And we can you know, sort of drill down on that. Checks and balances. What the Biden administration is doing right now is trying to lock in, especially all of its climate change policies. So we still are a country of laws and regulations. And once those regulations are in place, they can be undone, but there's a process. And that was something that the Trump administration struggled with for, you know, in 2020, 2016 to 2020. And from the looks of who they're appointing, I think they're going to struggle again with that. But the other things are, you know, you have the courts, and I think there's going to be a lot of litigation. I think the ACLU, the NAACP, Planned Parenthood, you name the organization, the conservation alliances, the environmental groups are going to be in court beginning January 21, challenging the actions. The other thing is you have procedural rules. You know, in the House, they're much more limited than in the Senate. And we can talk about this a little bit more, but undoing laws that have passed is a little bit harder than I think President Trump envisions.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much, Karen. And I know you will go in more details with Vicky. With respect to the Project 25, if I give you, and I'm sorry about that because I would like to talk for hours, but with respect to Project 2025 from the Heritage Foundation, will you pursue that? If you have 30 seconds.
Yes. Yes, he will. And I think what he's going to do is whatever he can do through regulation and through executive order. I think that's where they're going to start their Project 2025. And again, I think there's going to be lawsuits that try to stop it.
Thank you very much, Karen. And the last one, everybody heard about its mass deportation plan. Will he do that immediately?
From the people he's appointed, I think he will. Steve Miller's now deputy chief of staff, probably the most anti-immigrant person that he will have in his administration. And I think where he's going to start is what happens anyway. If you're in the country illegally and you commit a crime beyond coming in illegally, you are being deported. That's happened in every administration. So I think he's going to continue to do that. He's going to do more of that. For him to deport 15 million to 30 million people takes a lot of money. Congress is going to have to weigh in on that. And just one little fact that came out in the exit polling of 30,000 people, 56% of Americans who have voted do not agree with deportation at all. They think there should be a path to citizenship. So I think there's just going to be some popular backlash to his deportation plan.
And thank you very much, Karen, for all of that. So over to you, Vicky. Who is actually in charge in Europe? Could you give us the state of play among EU member states and who are, according to you, the most influential states within the EU?
She's on mute.
You're on mute. You're on mute, Vicky. Is it? Can we hear you, Vicky? We're really sorry for all this trouble with the IT. So I don't want to answer for you, Vicky. So okay, I'll move on. So maybe Karen, before Vicky is able to repair her mic, maybe Karen, we will go on. We will jump to the transatlantic relationship, if you agree, and I would like to apologize with the audience because we have key topic on the transatlantic relationship that we were supposed to discuss, and I think the first one is the America First policy of President, on which Vicky will be able to respond, but
Sure.
And the increase in tariffs. Maybe we can jump to that and go back to Vicky and
Vicky. Sure. So yeah, I know for our audience, probably tariffs are one of the biggest concerns. So let me just set the stage here. So Congress is the only body that can enforce tariffs. They have delegated some of that authority to the president under specific circumstances. Trump's rationale for tariffs is to bring manufacturing back to the United States. That is, unfortunately for him, not one of the specific reasons for which you can increase tariffs, right? So he's got a hurdle to go over. The other piece of this is that, except for Trump, everybody else knows tariffs increase prices. And if you listen to members of Congress, Republicans, in the last several days, each of them have said, well, we understand tariffs, but we have to do it in a way that doesn't increase prices. So I say that to say he has to have all the Republicans, especially in the House, on his tariff agenda. And it's going to be very close in the House. And he doesn't have that, nor does he have the support of businesses about tariffs. So
it's a good news for Europe.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of pushback by U.S. businesses and by members of Congress on, a 20%, 30%, 60%. Now, anti-China is a bipartisan issue. And so I would separate the China part of this from the European or transatlantic.
Okay. Thank you so much, Karen. And Vicky, so you're back. So
Yes,
who's in charge in Europe? Tell us, who are the new influencers?
Yeah, thanks, Mathilde. I don't know if Murphy joined us today, but technical is definitely not on our side. But thanks for the question. I mean, as you know, 2024 is also a transition year in the EU. Earlier in July, the EU citizens also voted the new European Parliament. And as we are speaking, the European Parliament is doing the beauty contest of the new College of European Commissioners. So right now, President Ursula von der Leyen is kind of in charge, but also not entirely. We know that there was a paradigm shift already for economic security over the past few years, but in European Commission President-elect Ursula von der Leyen's political guidelines, these were articulated more than ever. This probably also had her winning support to continue her second term at the helm of the European Commission. But let's face it, Europe is right now at the losing end. Regardless of all the efforts, the EU has not been able to come out as a strong force following the COVID pandemic, and the weaknesses of the Union became more evident with the Ukraine war. Since the beginning of the current Commission's mandate, the EU has been on the forefront to push forward its green agenda, and this has been jeopardizing the existence of crucial industries with the pace of the transition. What happens on a member states level and who is going to be in charge? Well, we have seen in the first Trump term that Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel, they were forming a strong political axis. But today, France is struggling, and the German government has just collapsed. So Europe is divided more than ever. We see the rise of the far-right governments. And then we also see like politicians and prime ministers like Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni taking more a prominent role in trying to maintain dialogue among member states. And she might be the one who is also taking a leading role in taking up the dialogue with the US. So during the European Council meeting in Budapest last week, she urged the EU to focus on setting its own house in order. And she was talking about tariffs, competitiveness, and defense as the most pressing issues the bloc faces at the moment when it comes to countering Donald Trump's election win. So this was also once more underpinned by Mario Draghi, who stressed that it was more urgent than ever to overhaul the EU economy and act on the recommendations that he put forward in his landmark report on competitiveness. So I think the question is not who is going to negotiate or who is going to be in charge, but what the EU is going to do. Is the EU going to be reactive, or could it actually become proactive for once? We know that a dedicated task force within the European Commission was set up to work on different scenarios for the outcome of the US elections. So I sincerely hope that the Commission is preparing its work program and the new legislative term that they will put Europe first, finally, among their priorities.
Thank you very much, Vicky. So knowing that, according to you, what will be the EU reaction to Trump protectionism and polarization?
It's, of course, yet to be seen, Mathilde, but I think what we can European Commission President von der Leyen said that, first of all, we need to engage. Secondly, we need to discuss common interests, and then we go into negotiations. So the US is going to remain the EU's #1 trading partner and ally, but the era of multilateralism and free trade is likely to be over. So the question is how the EU will respond. That's what I also referred to in the first part, and how fast. The speed of responsiveness will be the key of survival, I would say. Trump is very difficult to anticipate. I think we can agree on that. And therefore, this Commission task force and all the policymakers right now need to really be fast on putting forward multiple scenarios. In order to strengthen the position of the EU, there is a need for deepening the integration of the EU services market and prepare credible retaliatory measures against the US. How this will work out within the diverging positions of the member states, that's to be seen. I think it's likely that there will be a geopolitical deal that will be done between the two parties in order to, for example, cool off the tariff war. But I think we can also see different member states trying to have bilateral deals with Trump. If we go to tariffs and also reflecting on what Karen said, that during the first Trump term, we have seen that President Juncker was rather successful in avoiding tariffs from the US. But of course, that came with a price, with liquefied natural gas purchases and also American soybeans. We have now seen over the weekend that Ursula von der Leyen also came forward with the idea of increasing the purchase of LNGs from the US. At the same time, we know that Trump has a different agenda with fossil fuels. So would that really please him? That's a good question, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Vicky. So I think now it's a good time to look at key topics at stake in the transatlantic relationship, trade, that Karen addressed a bit. Well, we had this, and you addressed too, Vicky, during this sustainability with the ongoing COP29 and defense. So Karen told us a bit about tariff. So on trade, Vicky, what should the EU response be to the America First policy and the increase in tariffs, the potential increase in tariff? Because Karen was explaining us, which was very useful, that he cannot raise the tariff by himself, and that there is certain rules and certain opposition from the Congress potentially and the businesses, if I understand correctly, Karen. So Vicky, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the answer is simple. It's time for the EU to be bold. Everybody's talking about competitiveness, but simply talking will not be enough this time. So this is a 5 minutes before midnight moment. And if the EU does not act along together with the member states, basically we can say that our children will only learn about brands like Volkswagen and Renault from the history books. They will cease existing. So Trump was already playing with fire during his first term, and I think he will not be shy this time to really take nuclear decisions in order to defend the US interests. So in my view, the EU should be bold and come up with a proposal of the European first policy, the same as he is doing. So we have seen that also, that during the Biden administration, the decisions and the policies that he has put forward, like the IRA, really made the EU not an investment-friendly environment. I can also give you an example of a really nice, truly European project, which was for electric trucks, where we really saw that could have been a pioneer in Europe across member states. But the investor just didn't see the future in Europe. They said, we want to invest in the US because that's much more interesting for us. So I think the direct threat is here, and Europe really needs to step up the game. Otherwise, we will not succeed.
Mathilde, may I add something that...
Of course,
just
on tariff, I was about to give you the floor, please.
Okay, no, just to follow up on what Vicky said, because I think, so one of the biggest ironies, at least for me, is Biden tried to restructure the economy and end sort of trickle down economics in really, have investment come to the United States, have job growth come to the United States in key industries. And it is the one thing that totally angered our European partners, right? The IRA. Trump talked about doing that through tariffs. And I would say the harm done to the EU by the Trump policy will be far greater than the harm done in the IRA. Now, Trump has also said that, he's going to undo the IRA, which in so many ways is like just major, major climate investment. He's going to undo infrastructure. He's going to undo the CHIPS Act. So just again, for our audience, especially our European colleagues who are listening this morning and this afternoon for your time, for those laws to be undone, he has to go to Congress. Modifications have to pass the House. They have to pass the Senate. They have to pass the Senate by a 60-vote margin because of the filibuster. Now, there are some tricks because the CHIP Act, in fact, was passed by, a procedure called reconciliation. So it didn't require that 60-vote margin. But that's a limited procedure, and I think they're going to use that for their tax cuts. So I think all of this hollowing out of existing laws, not to mention the fact that all of these laws have produced investments in communities where people are living and representatives are voting on their behalf. And so we've already seen 20 Republicans in the House asking the leadership not to undo the climate benefits of the IRA because it's helping their constituents. And what bridge are you going to tear down in or not build in Iowa when people need a bridge? So I think there's a lot of bravado going on, but in the end, we are a country of laws, and to undo them, there are certain things that you have to hurdles that you have to accomplish to undo them.
It's a good news, Karen. Thank you for that. So I was about to ask you both, but Karen answered a bit. On sustainability, which is our second topic, what can we expect from drill, baby drill of Donald Trump? So Karen answered with respect, which is super interesting, the potential unraveling of the IRA. We also have the potential withdrawal of the Paris Agreement. Would you like to say one word on this, Karen, very shortly, and then I give the floor to Vicky on the climate Paris Agreement?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, he's going to do anything high profile that he can. So he's going to withdraw. Okay. I think that's going to, that'll definitely be a bump. but it's going to be a lot harder to undo what's in place. He's going to drill. They're going to change the permit process, but all the environmental and clean energy investments and investors want those permit processes to be loosened up. And so I think it's gonna be all flowers blooming here. I think you're gonna have drilling, you're gonna have fracking, you're gonna have solar, you're gonna have wind, you're gonna have nuclear, you're gonna have thermal. I think it's all gonna happen.
Thank you, Karen. Vicky, I know you want to say a word on that with respect to the climate consequences for Europe.
Yeah, maybe just one thing about what Karen has mentioned. I think it's very important to see that indeed, if the IRA stays in place, that is going to still have this great environment for investors and also for pioneering on wind and solar. So that's from a competitiveness point of view from the EU, I would say it's still a threat, but it's still an opportunity. But when we look into the bigger picture, climate change, I mean, we can say that Trump's victory equals climate disaster. While the EU is trying everything to get rid of fossil fuels, he's doing whatever it takes to build it back. So we know that his climate agenda has been no secret, but I think that it will be extremely detrimental to the global efforts to reduce the impact of climate change, what he's going to do. So talking about the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, I think it would leave the country sidelined from international discussions about the expansion of clean energy, and it would also give the opportunity for China to continue outcompeting America on the solar panel, electric vehicles, and other green technologies. And by doing so, this will also be detrimental to the EU industry, if not killing it. So I'm hoping that the outcome of the elections, as I mentioned before, is going to be an alarm bell for the EU. And we have this promised clean industrial deal and subsequent legislative and non-legislative proposals. These should cement the future of competitive, investor-friendly, and yet carbon-efficient EU industry. This will be challenging for sure, and will require unified effort from both member states and from the Commission. But let's show that we can do this. So I'm really hoping that this time the Trump administration will turn this into an opportunity for the EU.
I am totally on your side on this, Vicky. So I have a last question before we take the questions from the floor. I think we have 4 or 5 questions. So, and some of the questions that I pre-read relate on that. So on defense, based on the world geopolitics, not to say too much, especially Ukraine and the Middle East, and the shifting political alliances around the globe, what can we expect from the Donald Trump presidency? And what about NATO? So I think, Karen, and I know it's your expertise, those geopolitics topics, so the floor is yours, and then Vicky, you can definitely dialogue with Karen.
So very quickly, I think additional funding for Ukraine is going to be very hard to accomplish. If the Republicans are in control in the House, there's literally no way that the appropriations can happen there. And the question is whether there are 60 Democrats and Republicans in the Senate who are going to demand it be put in an appropriations bill. I don't see that happening. With NATO, I think that's a whole different ballgame. Trump can't just unilaterally take the country out of NATO. I think what you're going to see is a lot of what we saw from 2016 to 2020, a huge lack of US leadership. I mean, in contrast to Biden's amazing leadership in NATO and putting the coalition together, I think you're going to see zero leadership, and it's just going to be an antagonistic relationship day in and day out with Trump. On the Middle East, honestly, I don't know. I just don't know. I can't see an end to that, and I can't see Trump putting an end to it. there we can
And
just
I
hope.
think, Karen, we will come back on that in the question, especially on
Yeah.
Ukraine. We have a question on that. But thank you for sharing your views in this momentum where no one really knows what I guess Donald Trump will do with respect to foreign policy. So I know, Vicky, you want to address a point on defense and Europe.
Yeah, maybe just going back what Karen said, I fully agree that Trump will do whatever it takes to reduce its support to Ukraine and also like flex his muscles in terms of his participation in NATO, although indeed he has international commitments to play. At the same time, we know that the EU has also doing its efforts to speed up and enforce its defense power. For the first time ever, we have now, or we will have a new European Commission with a commissioner in charge of defense. But at the same time, he will not have much of a power unless he receives additional funding, because that's what we are really lacking at European level. And cross-border, multi-country projects that requires funding. And Trump has been very critical about NATO members, particularly from the EU, that did not meet the 2% spending requirement. So that's going to be a critical point. And investment in this truly European army is necessary. And just to give an example, the new commissioner, during his hearing, he mentioned that only in his country, in Lithuania, there is a 10 billion investment needed in the army by 2028. And in contrast, only around 1.5 billion has been allocated in total EU extra spending for defense. So that's, we can say, ridiculous. And we also see that Russia is spending more in defense in 2025 than the entire EU 27. So that is also, anticipating what can happen next. And we can also see, and I don't know, Karen, what Karen thinks about this, but the US focus will might shift to the east, to China. So that is going to also raise some concerns about European security. So,
Oh, go ahead. No, Vicky, the one thing I was going to add on defense is that the EU's new minister will get to, if he's confirmed, to get to talk to a Fox News host who apparently is going to be our Secretary of Defense. But I digress.
So, I mean, maybe I will do the icebreaker.
You can't make this up.
No. So maybe we, if you both agree, we can pick some questions from the audience. I know we still have like almost 15 minutes. So the first question is for you, Karen. It's from Lisa Agar of Canto. How much did disinformation play in engaging low propensity and disengaged voters?
So it played a huge role. Low information, disengaged voters were the voters who decided within days of the election how they were going to vote. I think 48% of them decided within 3 days, 57% of them decided within 7 days. So they were not getting deep information. Mostly they were getting misinformation from various platforms. And we all know Trump was like with Joe Rogan for 3 hours. That's the kind of information these low information, low engaged voters were getting, and that's what they voted on. So it had a huge impact in my view on the shifts.
Thank you, Karen. Unless you want to say something, Vicky, I think it was more a US question, but of course. So the second question is from Lisa Fuentes from the company Fuentes, and it's a question for Karen because the webinar is about the US result. Any insight, Karen, on Latinos and who are highly, the question is that they are highly heterogeneous group, and how is it tied or not to immigration? Everybody, I think, was quite surprised about the Latino vote, especially when you showed the chart at the beginning of the webinar.
So the Latino vote is not coalesced, right? I mean, the Latinos in the United States, you have Latinos from Venezuela, from Cuba, you have, Latinos from Mexico, you have Latinos who have been here 4 or 5, generations. And so their interests are as diverse as every other American interest. I think what we in terms of immigration, I think what one can see in the exit polling is, like most human beings, everybody thinks critical remarks are not about them. So if you are an immigrant and Trump is talking about these horrible people who are coming in to the United States, he's not talking about you, right? And so there's, if people have come in legally, it's the other people. There's a lot of the other going on when you look at the immigrant vote in our country about issues about immigration. And so it's not a monolith. We cannot say, oh, all Latinos think this way, all Latinos think that way. The other thing you had is a real impact, a community impact on Latino communities. They tend to be border communities. They were inundated. And it was incredible hardship. So one of the reasons why Arizona vote was 2.5 points in the other direction, in almost a shift of 4 points, is because those communities were exhausted by people coming into the country illegally, not documented.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Karen. You have tons of questions, so that's why I'm spinning you up.
Okay,
so
go ahead.
The third question is from Michel Lomons from KLM. How likely is that Trump can terminate the war in Ukraine, not in 24 hours, but quickly?
Well, I think if the United States shuts the money off, which I think Trump has every intention of doing, the Ukrainians are not going to have a choice. It's not so much that Trump will do something to shut the war. If the Ukrainians don't have the means to defend themselves, they're not going to have an option.
So unfortunately, the answer is short on this one. You want to add something, Vicky? Or?
Yeah, maybe just, I think this is going to be, because this was really center of his campaign, right? So this is something he will deliver upon. And this is no news for Europe. This is definitely not no good news for Ukraine, but he will do it. Whether it's 24 hours, for sure not, but in a short term, he will deliver upon this.
So let's see what we will do, we European. So the next question is from Lisa Marshall. As Trump's new best friend is an electric car manufacturer and Trump is so high on gas, is their beautiful relationship likely to last? And what might the consequences be as it continues in the near future?
Good question.
I know Lisa, and I can recognize the drafting. So.
Well, I think the reason why, one of the many reasons why Elon was jumping into this is his frustration with the US government's regulatory framework. God forbid he has to abide by the laws for his electric vehicles, for his space program, et cetera, the permitting process, and policies that are contradictory, if both are, benefiting from them, there is no conflict, because this isn't personal, this is business, right? So Trump, only those of us who sort of live, more on the left look at consistencies versus inconsistencies, including in our relationships. Nobody on the right does that, right? Pushing gas, fossil fuels, coal, whatever, that's in Trump's interest. He's going to do that. Does Elon Musk care? No, he's not an environmentalist. He just cares about his business. And so what he's pushing is an end to the regulatory framework that is stopping him from doing what he wants whenever he wants.
And Karen, if I may add one, because we still have 2 questions. So you tell me if it's not possible, Vicky, but you explained before we launched the webinar, we had our internal discussion that the fact that Elon Musk was appointed is this crazy name science fiction agency, if I may speak on my behalf.
Oh, yeah. No, so
I really like what you told us behind the doors, and I think it's worth addressing it for everybody.
sure. So, you know, Trump supposedly appointed Elon Musk and Verswamy to a department, except that that department doesn't exist. In the only, you know, again, we're still a country of laws, even though Trump seems to ignore them. Congress is the only entity that can create a department, can create an agency of the government, can actually fund that agency, can staff that agency. Now, Elon Musk can exist outside the government. You know, Trump can set up some kind of commission and they can all, you know, do research and opine on how they're going to change the government. But a lot of these details, you know, are yet to be worked out, including Musk's conflict of interest with what I just said before. A lot of his projects are regulated by the government. He gets over $10 billion in contracts. So how he's going to exist in both worlds is going to be problematic. And I envision a lot of legal battles about it.
Thank you, Karen. And we have a question from Dorothée Duron-Rivron from DDR Communication. What relations should be expected between Trump and the Fed and their impact? I think it's very interesting because it's a financial question.
Yeah, so Trump wants to control the Fed. I think what he doesn't quite realize is the Fed is going to push back on that, as will Congress. And so you know, he's going to talk about it, bloviate about it, but actually whether he can legally do something about it, you know, the Fed and the chairman of the Fed are just going to become immovable objects. And I don't think his control is not going to happen.
Thank you very much. I know we still have some questions, but maybe we can answer separately after the webinar, if the speaker are okay with that. So I would like to thank you, Karen, in this to take time in this just 1 week after the election to give us your insights on what's going on in the US, and hopefully we will you can update us. And thank you very much, Vicky, for hosting this webinar and give us your insight on the EU state of play. And thanks to
Thank you, Mathilde. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, everybody who's out there listening. I really appreciate your participation.
And sorry again for the IT. So you're back on mute, Vicky, but I can conclude for you. So next time we meet in person, all of us in Brussels. Have a nice day or afternoon, everybody. Take care.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.